the vast, indigo canvas of the Pacific Ocean, an expanse so immense it swallowed empires and birthed legends. It is here, amidst this boundless blue, that one of history's most improbable tales of survival and reinvention unfolds. The year is 1789. Great Britain reigned supreme. Her naval made a global declaration of power, her ships charting courses to every corner of the known world and beyond. Among them, the HMS Bounty, a vessel destined not for glory, but for infamy. Its mission to transplant breadfruit from Tahiti to the West Indies would tragically unravel, igniting a rebellion that would echo through the ages. Led by the charismatic Fletcher Christian, a band of desperate mutineers cast off the chains of tyranny, abandoning Captain Bligh to his fate. Their crime, an act of defiance against the very empire they served. Their future, a desperate flight from justice into the uncharted, unforgiving reaches of the Pacific. Most expected them to vanish, to be swallowed by the sea or consumed by their own lawlessness. But what they found, in a tiny volcanic speck barely visible on any chart, was not just refuge, but the crucible for an astonishing social experiment. This is the story of Pitcairn Island, a haven born of rebellion, a society forged from isolation and desperation. From bloodshed and chaos, a unique democracy would rise, shaped by necessity, moral awakening, and the sheer will to survive. How did a group of outcasts, marooned beyond civilization's reach, manage to build an enduring system of self-governance? Prepare to journey through betrayal, struggle, and profound transformation as we uncover the uncharted democracy of Pitcairn Island. The late 18th century, an era defined by vast ambition, relentless expansion, and the unyielding might of the British Empire. From the bustling docks of Portsmouth to the farthest reaches of the globe, the Union Jack fluttered over a dominion built on trade, conquest, and the formidable power of the Royal Navy. This wasn't just a collection of warships. It was the sinew and steel of an empire that commanded the oceans, projecting its influence into every corner of a rapidly shrinking world. For young men across Britain, the sea offered a life of unimaginable hardship, yet also the tantalizing promise of adventure, riches, and a chance to escape the drudgery of landlocked existence. Life aboard a naval vessel, however, was a brutal crucible. Discipline was absolute, enforced with the lash and the gallows. Squalid conditions, meager rations, and the constant threat of disease made every voyage a test of endurance. Yet, this harsh regimen forged men of iron, capable of navigating uncharted waters, enduring tempestuous gales, and engaging in ferocious naval combat. Beneath the decks, a microcosm of British society was crammed together. Officers of aristocratic lineage commanding the sons of farmers, artisans, and pressed men, all bound by the rigid hierarchy of the Navy. Their mission, to safeguard trade routes, discover new territories, and extend the empire's reach. As the age of sail approached its zenith, the thirst for knowledge, resources, and strategic advantage drove audacious expeditions into the planet's most remote corners. Maps were still being drawn, continents were being discovered, and the allure of the unknown was a powerful siren song. These voyages weren't merely about adventure. They were instrumental to Britain's global strategy, reinforcing its economic dominance and political supremacy. Every ship that sailed, every island charted, every new species documented, was another thread woven into the intricate tapestry of an empire that believed its destiny was to rule the waves. It was within this grand, often ruthless context of imperial ambition and naval power that the stage was set for one of history's most enduring maritime dramas, a story that would begin, like so many others, with a ship, a captain, and a mission into the vast, indifferent Pacific. Into this world of imperial ambition and iron discipline stepped Captain William Bligh. His name has echoed through history, often synonymous with tyranny, a villain etched into popular imagination. Yet, to truly understand the events that unfolded, we must peel back the layers of caricature and confront the complex reality of the man. Bligh was, by all accounts, an extraordinary seaman and navigator. He had served under the legendary Captain James Cook on his final, fateful voyage, a testament to his skill and early promise. He possessed an almost unparalleled ability to chart courses, manage supplies, and bring a ship through the most treacherous waters. His logbooks were meticulously kept, his observations precise, his dedication to the mission unwavering. But Bligh was also a man under immense pressure, both self-imposed and institutional. The Royal Navy demanded absolute obedience and delivered harsh consequences for failure. Supplies were scarce, voyages long, and the health of the crew a constant concern. A captain bore the ultimate responsibility for every soul on board and every plank of his ship. Bligh's leadership style, however, was notoriously abrasive. He was known for his quick temper, his cutting remarks, and a micromanagement that often verged on the obsessive. He had a profound distrust of his subordinates, believing only he possessed the requisite competence to succeed. This combination of unparalleled professional excellence and deeply flawed interpersonal skills created a combustible dynamic. He drove his men hard, expecting nothing less than his own demanding standards. While his methods ensured the Bounty was one of the cleanest and best-maintained ships in the fleet, it came at a psychological cost. The line between firm command and outright despotism blurred under the stress of command. For all his navigational genius, Bligh struggled to inspire loyalty, often alienating those who served under him. He was a survivor, a man who would later achieve one of the most astonishing feats of open boat navigation in history, a testament to his grit and resourcefulness. But before that legendary survival, his command of the HMS Bounty would become a crucible, igniting a rebellion that would forever define his legacy and forge an unexpected path for a handful of desperate men. The vessel at the heart of this unfolding drama was His Majesty's Armed Vessel Bounty, a relatively small merchant ship purchased and refitted by the Royal Navy. Her mission, however, was anything but ordinary. She was not bound for battle or grand discovery in the traditional sense. Instead, the Bounty was tasked with a unique botanical expedition to transport breadfruit saplings from the lush South Pacific island of Tahiti to the British West Indies. This mission, conceived by Sir Joseph Banks, the renowned botanist who had sailed with Cook, was born from a complex web of economic necessity and colonial strategy. In the West Indies, British sugar plantations thrived, but their success depended heavily on a vast, exploited workforce, enslaved Africans. Feeding this enormous population was a persistent, costly challenge. Conventional food sources like salted meat and imported grains were expensive and often unsuitable for the tropical climate. The breadfruit, a staple in Polynesian diets, offered a tantalizing solution. It grew abundantly, required minimal cultivation, and yielded a starchy, nutritious fruit that could serve as a cheap, readily available food source for the enslaved laborers. This wasn't simply a humanitarian gesture. It was a pragmatic calculation designed to maximize profits by reducing the operational costs of the slave economy. The breadfruit mission was a testament to the brutal efficiency of the British Empire, transforming distant natural resources into instruments of control and exploitation. Bligh, with his extensive knowledge of botany and navigation honed under Cook, was considered the ideal man for such a delicate and crucial task. He had to sail halfway around the world, spend months cultivating fragile plants, and then transport them across another vast ocean, all while maintaining the health of his crew and the integrity of his ship. The success of this botanical venture held significant economic implications for a lucrative colonial enterprise, placing an immense burden of responsibility upon Bligh's shoulders. The Bounty's cargo was not gold or spices, but a botanical solution to a deeply immoral problem, setting the stage for a journey where the promise of a better future for some would tragically intertwine with the despair of others. After months of the relentless, gray monotony of the open sea, battling storms, scurvy, and a sheer psychological strain of isolation, The sight that greeted the crew of the HMS Bounty on October 26, 1788, was nothing short of a revelation. Tahiti. For European explorers, it was a name that had already become synonymous with an earthly paradise, a mythical land of abundance and unbridled natural beauty. As the Bounty dropped anchor in Matavai Bay, the weary sailors gazed upon a vision that surpassed their wildest dreams. Lush, emerald-green mountains soared into the sky, draped in waterfalls that cascaded into crystal-clear lagoons. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and ripe fruit. Palm trees swayed gently on pristine white sand beaches, and vibrant coral reefs teemed with kaleidoscopic marine life. But it wasn't just the scenery that captivated them. It was the people. Hundreds of Tahitians, adorned with flowers and intricate tattoos, paddled out in their canoes, their joyous greetings echoing across the water. Their hospitality was immediate, their spirit open and welcoming. For men who had endured the brutal discipline of the Royal Navy, the stark contrast was intoxicating. The concept of survival in Tahiti seemed effortless. Food was abundant, readily plucked from trees or fished from the generous ocean. The social structure appeared less rigid, the customs focused on community and enjoyment. Many of the crew had spent their lives in cramped, impoverished European cities, and the freedom, the warmth, the sheer vibrancy of Tahitian life was a powerful narcotic. It was a world away from the floggings, the cramped hammocks, the monotonous diet of hardtack and salt pork. Here, under the benevolent gaze of the South Pacific sun, the very notion of duty and discipline began to feel like a distant, irrelevant memory. This tropical idyll, a verdant oasis in a vast, unforgiving ocean, would prove to be both a blessing and a curse for the men of the Bounty, sowing seeds of desire and contentment that would ultimately clash violently with the grim realities of their commission. What began as a botanical mission quickly evolved into an extended cultural immersion. The Bounty's stay in Tahiti stretched far beyond Captain Bligh's original estimation, lasting a luxurious 6 months. The delicate breadfruit saplings required meticulous care and time to establish roots before transplantation, forcing the crew into an unprecedented period of prolonged contact with the indigenous Tahitian people. During these months, the rigid boundaries of naval hierarchy and discipline began to fray, worn down by the seductive power of a different way of life. Many of the crew members, particularly the younger men, forged deep and intimate connections with the local population. They learned the Tahitian language, participated in local customs, and embraced the relaxed, communal lifestyle. For Fletcher Christian, the master's mate, and others, these bonds became particularly profound, transcending mere casual acquaintance. They formed relationships, started families, and experienced a sense of belonging and acceptance utterly foreign to their lives in Georgian England. The Tahitian women, in particular, offered a warmth and companionship that contrasted sharply with the harsh, often isolated existence aboard a British warship. This prolonged interaction created a powerful internal conflict within the crew. They had arrived as disciplined sailors of the king, hardened by the sea and strict command. Now, many of them were living a life of relative freedom, surrounded by beauty, abundance, and genuine affection. The stark reality of their future, a return to the cramped, disciplined, and often brutal confines of naval service, subject to Bligh's mercurial temper, became an increasingly bitter pill to swallow. The lines between their original identity as British sailors and their newfound sense of self as temporary Tahitians blurred beyond recognition. The island paradise had offered them not just respite, but a vision of an alternative existence, one where the burdens of empire and the lash of authority seemed infinitely distant. This deep emotional attachment, fostered over half a year, would prove to be a critical, yet largely unspoken, catalyst for the dramatic events soon to engulf the HMS Bounty. As the 6 idyllic months in Tahiti drew to a close, a palpable tension began to seep back into the ship's atmosphere, replacing the easygoing camaraderie. The delicate breadfruit plants, now thriving in their on-deck conservatory, were ready for their long voyage to the West Indies. But the crew was anything but. The prospect of leaving their newfound paradise, their Tahitian families and lovers, and returning to the crushing monotony and harsh realities of naval life was a source of profound dread and resentment. The dream was over, and the nightmare of duty loomed large. Captain Bligh, perhaps sensing the unraveling discipline, or perhaps simply reverting to his true nature under the stress of impending departure, became increasingly severe. His temper, always volatile, flared with greater frequency and intensity. Minor infractions were met with disproportionate punishments. Accusations of theft and neglect, often petty or unfounded, became common. He berated his officers publicly, humiliated his men, and constantly threatened them with the cat o' nine tails. The easygoing Bligh who had permitted the cultural immersion in Tahiti was gone, replaced by the demanding, irascible commander the men had known before. The contrast between the two worlds was unbearable. Life in Tahiti had offered warmth, freedom, and sustenance. The Bounty offered cramped quarters, hard labor, and a diet that was already returning to its former meager state. The longer they had spent in paradise, the more intolerable the prospect of returning to their original lives became. The social order of the ship, already weakened by months of shore leave, began to crack under Bligh's renewed tyranny. Whispers of discontent grew into murmurs of defiance. The crew, once united by a shared mission, now found common ground in their shared misery and growing animosity towards their captain. The seeds of rebellion, sown during the languid days of Polynesian paradise, were now germinating in the fertile ground of desperation and simmering resentment, setting the stage for an explosive confrontation that would shake the foundations of naval discipline and carve a new path into history. The volatile atmosphere aboard the Bounty finally ignited in the pre-dawn hours of April 28, 1789. The ship was sailing near Tofua, an island about 30 miles southwest of Tahiti, when the simmering discontent boiled over. It began swiftly, quietly, and with shocking efficiency. Just after 5 a.m., Fletcher Christian, driven to breaking point by a final, humiliating confrontation with Bligh over missing coconuts, burst into the captain's cabin. With him were several armed crewmen, their faces grim and determined. Christian, a man who had once been Bligh's protégé and close friend, now stood before him, a bayonet at his chest. "Hold your tongue, sir, or you are dead this instant." Christian's voice, usually polite and deferential, was now cold and resolute. Bligh, roused from his sleep, fought back with characteristic ferocity, his shouts and curses echoing through the narrow confines of his cabin. But he was quickly overpowered, his hands bound behind his back. The element of surprise, combined with the sheer speed of the mutineers' actions, left little room for resistance. The chaos spilled onto the deck. Loyal crew members, awakened by the commotion, were quickly rounded up and confined. The ship's armory was seized, and those who hesitated were met with the glint of cutlasses and the cold steel of bayonets. The mutiny was not a spontaneous, drunken brawl, but a desperate, planned act orchestrated by a core group of disaffected men, led by Christian. They had crossed a line, committing an act of treason punishable by death. The HMS Bounty, once a symbol of imperial ambition, was now in the hands of rebels. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, casting long shadows across the deck, the full gravity of their actions began to sink in. They had seized the ship, but what now? Their fate, and the fate of the man they had deposed, hung precariously in the balance, swaying with the rhythm of the waves. With the Bounty firmly in the mutineers' grasp, the question turned to the fate of Captain Bligh. To kill him outright would make their crime even graver, but to let him live meant the threat of retribution, of vengeful pursuit across the vast Pacific. The decision was brutal but decisive. Bligh and 18 loyal crew members would be cast adrift in the ship's open launch, a small, barely seaworthy boat. They were given a meager allowance of provisions, 5 days' worth of bread, a few pieces of pork, a small amount of water, and some rum. No charts, no compass, though Bligh later managed to procure a quadrant and sextant, and certainly no firearms. The launch was dangerously overloaded, its gunnels almost awash, barely clearing the waves. The mutineers, under Christian's command, cut the launch free, leaving Bligh and his men to the mercy of the vast, unforgiving Pacific. As the Bounty sailed away, disappearing over the horizon, the Loyalists were left facing what seemed like an impossible fate. The odds were insurmountable. They were in the middle of an uncharted ocean, thousands of miles from any known European settlement, exposed to the elements, with minimal food and water, and the constant threat of starvation, dehydration, and hostile encounters with indigenous islanders. The small boat bobbed precariously, a tiny speck on an enormous, indifferent expanse of water. For Bligh, it was a moment of profound humiliation and a test of his legendary seamanship that few men could have survived. Yet, it was precisely in this crucible of despair that Bligh's true genius for navigation and survival would emerge. His journey, an epic testament to human resilience, would become one of the most astonishing feats of open-boat navigation in maritime history. But for now, as the sun climbed higher, leaving them adrift under a relentless sky, only the vast ocean lay before them, a watery grave waiting to claim its desperate inhabitants. Meanwhile, the mutineers, with the Bounty at their command, sailed away into the unknown, their desperate act setting them on a path toward an uncharted democracy. From the ashes of Mutiny, an extraordinary testament to human endurance and unparalleled seamanship would emerge. Cast adrift in the vast, unforgiving Pacific, Captain William Bligh, along with 18 Loyalists, faced a death sentence. Their vessel, a mere 23-foot open launch, stocked with scant provisions, a few days' rations, a quadrant, a compass, and Bligh's unwavering will. What followed was one of the most astonishing feats of navigation in maritime history. For 47 grueling days, Bligh, a man known for his volatile temper but undeniable genius with a chart and sextant, guided his frail craft across 3,618 miles of treacherous ocean. He navigated by the stars, by the swells, by an innate understanding of a sea that few possess. Against hurricane-force winds, crushing waves, and the gnawing pangs of starvation, Bligh rations food with meticulous precision, ensuring his men's survival while pushing his own limits. His leadership, though often tyrannical, was now a lifeline. He kept spirits from completely breaking, fending off despair, even as men succumbed to exhaustion and exposure. Through uncharted reefs and hostile islands, past cannibal shores, Bligh steered his beleaguered crew towards the Dutch colony of Timor, a distant speck on the far horizon. It was a journey that defied belief, a triumph of human spirit and navigational brilliance that would cement Bligh's reputation as a master mariner, forever etching his name in the annals of exploration, even as the shadow of the Bounty mutiny would follow him for the rest of his days. This incredible voyage, born from betrayal, underscored the complex, often contradictory nature of Captain Bligh, a man capable of both inspiring rebellion and achieving the impossible. As Bligh battled the Pacific, Fletcher Christian and the remaining mutineers on the HMS Bounty faced a very different, yet equally profound crisis. The initial euphoria of their rebellion had evaporated, replaced by the chilling reality of their actions. They were now outlaws, marked men, adrift in an immense ocean with no safe harbor, no legitimate port of call. The weight of their crime, high treason against the British Crown, bore down on them. Every sunrise brought not hope, but the terrifying prospect of discovery and the inevitable hangman's noose. Where could they go? How could they disappear from the reach of the most powerful navy in the world? The Bounty, once a symbol of imperial might, was now their prison and their only hope for escape. But escape to where? The idyllic allure of Tahiti, with its welcoming shores and beautiful women, beckoned, yet Christian knew it was a temporary refuge at best. Bligh, if he survived, would undoubtedly send a search party. The thought of Bligh's survival must have haunted their every waking moment, a stark reminder that their rebellion was incomplete, their freedom tenuous. Internal divisions began to surface. Some yearned for the familiar comforts of Tahiti, others for a completely new life, far from any known chart. Christian, the reluctant leader of this desperate band, wrestled with the immense burden of his decision. His defiant act had unleashed a whirlwind, and now he had to find a sanctuary not just for himself, but for all those who had followed him into Mutiny, a place where their past could never catch up to their future. Driven by desperation and the urgent need for a permanent home, Fletcher Christian set a course for Tubuai, a small, lush island south of Tahiti. It was January 1790. They had hoped to found a new colony, a haven where they could live beyond the reach of British law. Upon arrival, the island seemed promising: fertile land, fresh water, and a seemingly welcoming indigenous population. The mutineers began to unload supplies, constructing rudimentary shelters and tilling the soil. But their dreams of an idyllic, self-sufficient paradise quickly shattered. The mutineers, a rough collection of sailors ill-suited for the delicate art of diplomacy, soon clashed with the local Tubuaian inhabitants. Their initial attempts at bartering turned to coercion, and their casual disregard for native customs escalated into open hostility. Skirmishes broke out, violent and bloody, forcing the islanders to defend their homes. Simultaneously, internal strife plagued the mutineer community. The inherent class distinctions that had fueled the mutiny resurfaced. The officers among them, like Christian, struggled to maintain order over the common seamen, now free from naval discipline, indulged in excessive drinking and reckless behavior. The initial unity born of rebellion fractured under the pressures of settlement. Christian, realizing that Tubuai was becoming a powder keg, a place of constant conflict and bloodshed, knew their experiment had failed. After just 3 tense months, the vision of a new Eden dissolved into violence and despair. Tubuai was not their haven. It was a brutal reminder that a new life could not be forged through conflict and indiscipline. They abandoned the island, leaving behind only the scars of their failed attempt. With the dream of Tubuai shattered, Christian and the mutineers had nowhere left to go but back to the familiar shores of Tahiti. It was a desperate and dangerous move. They knew that Bligh, if he had survived, would inevitably send a search party to Tahiti, the one place where he believed the mutineers would likely seek refuge. The very thought of returning to this known territory was fraught with peril, a gamble with their lives. But for some, the allure of Tahiti's beauty, its welcoming people, and the chance for a normal life, however, short-lived, outweighed the undeniable risk. Upon their return in September 1789, the crew reached a critical juncture, a moment that would forever cleave their fates. The Bounty anchored off Matavai Bay, and a profound split emerged. 16 of the mutineers, weary of the constant threat of discovery and the harsh reality of life as fugitives, chose to disembark. They believed they could blend in, perhaps even thrive, among the Tahitian populace, trusting that the vastness of the Pacific would delay, if not entirely prevent, their capture. They embraced what they hoped would be a new life, a fragile peace bought with immense risk. But Fletcher Christian, along with 8 other steadfast loyalists, men who understood the true gravity of their crime and the relentlessness of British justice, knew that Tahiti was a dead end. To remain was to court certain capture and the gallows. He had seen Bligh's incredible will to survive. He knew a pursuit was inevitable. Christian resolved to seek a truly hidden, permanent sanctuary, a place so remote, so utterly uncharted, that it would remain undiscovered for generations. His path was clear, deeper into the unknown, a high-stakes gamble for absolute, irreversible freedom, leaving behind those who dare to hope for a reprieve. For the 16 mutineers who chose to remain in Tahiti, life initially offered a semblance of the paradise they had once dreamed of. They integrated into Tahitian society, taking wives, building homes, and raising families. For a brief period, they lived a life free from the rigid discipline of the Royal Navy and the constant fear of discovery. Days were spent fishing, farming, and enjoying the simple pleasures of island life. They even helped the Tahitian chiefs in local conflicts, becoming figures of some influence due to their European weapons and fighting knowledge. But the shadow of their past loomed large. Captain Bligh, true to Christian's fears, had survived his incredible ordeal and returned to England, where he reported the mutiny. The Admiralty, enraged by the affront to British authority, dispatched HMS Pandora under the command of Captain Edward Edwards with a clear mission: scour the Pacific, find the Bounty, and bring the mutineers to justice. In March 1791, nearly 2 years after the mutiny, the Pandora arrived in Matavai Bay. For the Tahiti stayers, the idyllic dream shattered with the terrifying sight of the Royal Navy ship. It was an inevitable reckoning. The mutineers, now identifiable and scattered across the island, were systematically rounded up. 14 were captured, though 2 had already died in Tahiti. Captain Edwards, a man known for his harshness, ordered the construction of a cramped, brutal cell on the Pandora's quarterdeck, nicknamed Pandora's Box. Here, shackled and in chains, the captured men endured unimaginable suffering, packed into a space barely large enough to lie down, awaiting their grim passage back to England for court-martial and the almost certain gallows. Their gamble for a quiet life had failed, swallowed by the unyielding arm of British justice that reached even the furthest corners of the empire. While the Pandora scoured the known Pacific, Fletcher Christian and his dwindling band of loyalists were sailing into the great unknown, driven by an ever-intensifying desperation. Having abandoned Tibuai and then Tahiti, Christian knew that his only chance for true freedom lay in a place completely off the charts, a tiny speck of land so remote, so obscure, that it had escaped the notice of even the most diligent cartographers. The stakes were impossibly high. Every passing day brought the possibility of Bligh's survival and the relentless pursuit of the British Navy closer to their heels. Discovery meant not just capture, but certain ignominious death for all of them. Christian became obsessed with the idea of total isolation. He pored over every available chart, scrutinizing faded notations, seeking any hint of unconfirmed islands, rumored landmasses, or navigation errors from previous expeditions. His mind, once fueled by rebellion, was now consumed by an urgent, almost feverish quest for sanctuary. The Bounty, once a proud vessel, was now their only home and their prison. The tension on board was palpable. Hope was a fragile commodity, constantly threatened by the vast emptiness of the ocean and the crushing weight of their outlaw status. Christian knew he couldn't afford another failed settlement. This search was their last gamble, a journey into the geographic and psychological wilderness, with a line between freedom and extinction blurred. He needed a needle in a haystack, an island forgotten by time, a sanctuary where the echoes of British justice could never reach. He was literally sailing off the edge of the world, seeking not just land, but absolute oblivion from the civilization that had condemned them. Then, on a fateful day in January 1790, after months of relentless, high-stakes searching, fate, or perhaps divine intervention, played its hand. Christian's obsessive study of old, often inaccurate charts led him to a vague, almost forgotten entry. A tiny speck, merely a marginal notation, indicating an island whose position had been inaccurately recorded by explorer Philip Carteret in 1767. It was called Pitcairn Island, after the midshipman who first sighted it, but its true location was off by nearly 200 miles on the charts of the time. This geographical error, a cartographer's oversight, would become the mutineers' salvation. As the Bounty sailed closer to the coordinates Christian had meticulously deduced, a faint outline appeared on the horizon. It was a tiny volcanic island, barely 2 miles long, rising dramatically from the sea. As they approached, the mutineers stared in awe. It was everything they had desperately sought: rugged, dramatic, and, crucially, uninhabited. Lush green vegetation clung to its steep slopes, fresh water cascaded down volcanic cliffs, and its shores offered hidden coves. Pitcairn was a natural fortress, its treacherous coastline and lack of a natural harbor making it virtually inaccessible to large ships. This was no fleeting paradise like Tahiti, no battleground like Tubuai. This was a sanctuary, a true haven where the long arm of British law was unlikely to ever reach. For the exhausted and desperate mutineers, the sight of Pitcairn must have been like seeing the promised land. Their perilous journey through the unknown had ended, not with capture, but with the serendipitous discovery of their perfect, hidden refuge, a place where they could finally begin to dream of a new life, free from the world they had defied. The discovery of Pitcairn Island was only the beginning. To truly secure their future, Christian knew they had to erase their past, to sever every conceivable link to the world they had abandoned and defied. And so, on January 23rd, 1790, just days after their arrival, in the calm waters of what would forever be known as Bounty Bay, the mutineers executed their most audacious and irreversible act. They burned HMS Bounty. The ship, which had carried them across oceans, fueled their rebellion, and protected them in their desperate flight, was now a liability. Its mast could be seen from afar. Its presence would betray their location. With grim determination, they stripped the ship of anything useful, timber, tools, provisions, hauling it ashore. Then, with torches ignited, they set her ablaze. Flames, leaping high into the tropical night, consumed the wooden hull. Thick, acrid smoke billowed upwards, a beacon of defiance and finality visible for miles around. The crackling of the burning timbers mingled with the sounds of the waves, creating a dramatic, almost sacrilegious symphony. As the Bounty slowly sank into the depths of the bay, a smoldering wreck, it was more than just the destruction of a ship. It was a ceremonial severing of ties, a declaration that there was no turning back, no retreat, no escape, only this island. This act forged a new bond amongst the mutineers, an unspoken pact that their destiny was now irrevocably tied to this remote volcanic rock. From the ashes of the Bounty, a new, isolated society would be born, committed to an uncharted future on their hard-won haven. The smoke rising from Bounty Bay was not just an end. It was the defiant, blazing beginning of Pitcairn's unique story. In the annals of maritime rebellion, few tales resonate with the stark drama of the Bounty Mutiny. But as the HMS Bounty, stripped of its majesty, sank beneath the waves of Pitcairn Island in January 1790, a new, unforeseen chapter began. Ashore, a disparate band of humanity found themselves marooned on this volcanic speck, a crucible for a society unlike any other. This was not a homogeneous group of intrepid explorers, but a fractured collective. 9 British mutineers, burdened by their past and facing an uncertain future. 6 Tahitian men, brought unwillingly to this distant land, their own culture fractured, and 12 Tahitian women, thrust into a desperate coexistence, their fate inextricably linked to these volatile strangers. The immediate challenges were immense. Survival on Pitcairn demanded a delicate balance, a tenuous cooperation born of necessity. The lush, untamed landscape offered sustenance, wild goats, abundant fish, fertile soil for cultivation, but it had to be tamed, understood. The mutineers, with their European tools and seafaring knowledge, brought a degree of organizational structure. Christian, ever the leader, attempted to establish order, dividing the land and setting rules for their burgeoning settlement. Houses were constructed from pandanus leaves and timbers salvaged from the Bounty. Gardens were tilled, and a sense of routine slowly began to emerge from the chaos of their arrival. Yet, beneath this veneer of industriousness, the inherent demographic complexities seethed. This was not just a new community. It was a complex social experiment, a forced integration of cultures where power dynamics were immediately skewed. The Tahitian men, skilled in navigating their own world, found themselves subjugated, their labor essential, but their voices silenced. The Tahitian women, resilient and resourceful, became the linchpin of domestic life, their presence both a necessity and, tragically, a source of escalating tension. This island, a seemingly idyllic paradise, was already pregnant with the seeds of conflict, a testament to the fragile nature of power and the raw instincts of survival in an uncharted world. The fragile peace established on Pitcairn was a mere veneer, stretched thin over a volatile brew of power, paranoia, and primal desire. From the outset, the hierarchy was stark, an echo of the colonial world they had fled. The British mutineers, armed with their salvaged firearms and ingrained sense of superiority, asserted their dominance over the Tahitian men. These 6 Tahitian individuals, crucial to the physical labor of building a new life on the island, were systematically disarmed, stripped of their agency, and relegated to a subservient status. They were not partners in this new venture, but effectively indentured servants, their skills exploited, their dignity eroded. But it was the scarcity of a single, vital resource that truly poisoned the well: women. 12 Tahitian women had arrived on Pitcairn, a number disproportionately small compared to the 15 men, British and Tahitian combined. Initially, the mutineers had taken the majority of the women as their wives or companions, leaving the Tahitian men with few options and fewer rights. This imbalance festered, a source of deep resentment that grew with each passing day. The British men, consumed by their own desires and entitlement, saw the Tahitian women as spoils of their escape, a right rather than a partnership. This view, combined with their continued exploitation of the Tahitian men, created an unbearable chasm. Incidents of open disdain and cruelty became more frequent. The mutineers, many of them hardened sailors with little respect for authority or civility, treated the Tahitian men as little more than slaves, denying them fair shares of food, land, and companionship. The frustration and humiliation suffered by the Tahitian men reached a boiling point, fueled by the British men's casual cruelty and their undisputed control over the women. The isolated paradise, intended as a refuge, was slowly transforming into a pressure cooker, where the seeds of deep-seated animosity were sown, ready to erupt into a violent harvest. The simmering resentments on Pitcairn could not be contained indefinitely. In September 1793, just 3 years after their arrival, the fragile social fabric finally tore apart, plunging the island into an abyss of brutality and chaos. The Tahitian men, pushed beyond endurance by the mutineers' relentless cruelty, their wives stolen, their dignity trampled, finally rose up in a desperate bid for freedom. This was no organized military campaign, but a furious, spontaneous act of rebellion, born of utter desperation. On a fateful day in September, which would forever be etched in the island's grim history as Massacre Day, the Tahitian men seized their moment. Armed with salvaged muskets and improvised weapons, they ambushed the mutineers, targeting them one by one as they worked in their fields or rested in their homes. The air filled with the terrifying sounds of musket fire, shouts, and screams. The idyllic paradise became a blood-soaked battlefield. John Williams, Isaac Martin, William McCoy, and John Mills were among the first mutineers to fall, cut down in a hail of bullets and blows. The Tahitian men, having endured so much, now exacted a terrible retribution. But the violence, once unleashed, became a spiraling nightmare. The remaining mutineers, now fighting for their lives, retaliated with equal savagery. The Tahitian men themselves became victims of their own uprising, as the mutineers who survived the initial ambush turned their fury upon them, often with the reluctant aid of some of the Tahitian women, who feared for their own lives and the lives of their children. This was not a war with clear sides, but a horrifying free-for-all, a cycle of murder and revenge that threatened to annihilate every soul on the island. The lush vegetation, once a symbol of life, now became a silent witness to unimaginable atrocities. The dreams of a peaceful haven had curdled into a nightmare, demonstrating the brutal truth that even in the most remote corners of the earth, human nature, unchecked by law or conscience, can descend into the darkest depths of violence, bringing the community to the brink of utter extinction. Amidst the maelstrom of Massacre Day, the ultimate irony unfolded. Fletcher Christian, the charismatic leader who had orchestrated the mutiny, who had led his desperate band to this secret sanctuary, met his end not at the hands of British justice, but in the chaotic bloodshed he himself had, however unwittingly, helped to sow. On that terrible day in September 1793, as the Tahitian men rose in their desperate revolt, Christian became one of their primary targets. Accounts vary, but the grim consensus remains. Christian was working in his yam patch, or perhaps near his home, when he was ambushed. Driven by a desperate need for revenge against the mutineers who had stolen their land, their women, and their dignity, the Tahitian men sought out the man they perceived as the architect of their misery. One version of events suggests he was shot by the Tahitian man Taimua, who had taken his name from Thursday, October Christian, a cruel twist of fate. Another states he was struck down from behind. Regardless of the precise details, Christian, the defiant leader, the visionary navigator, fell. His death marked a profound and pivotal moment for the nascent community. He was the one who had commanded the ship, chosen the island, and attempted, however imperfectly, to impose order. With Christian gone, the last vestige of central authority evaporated. His passing didn't quell the violence. It intensified it. The remaining mutineers were now leaderless, their desperation morphing into a brutal struggle for individual survival. The Tahitian men, having exacted their primary revenge, found themselves caught in a retaliatory trap. Christian's death didn't bring peace. It plunged Pitcairn into an even deeper abyss of disarray. An anarchic free-for-all where alliances shifted like the tropical winds, and the line between hunter and hunted blurred into a horrifying, bloody mess. The ideal of a new society, born from the ashes of rebellion, now seemed destined to perish in a cycle of internecine murder and despair, a stark testament to the fragility of human constructs without a moral compass. With Fletcher Christian dead and the initial storm of Massacre Day having claimed most of the Tahitian men and several mutineers, Pitcairn was left in a state of horrifying freefall. The fragile dream of a new life had shattered, replaced by a brutal reality of unchecked power and primal urges. The remaining mutineers, just 4 of them, Matthew Quintal, William McCoy, Edward Young, and John Adams, descended into an abyss of alcoholism and petty tyranny. Stripped of leadership and consumed by fear and despair, they abandoned any pretense of creating an ordered society. Their only solace became the still brewing alcohol from salvaged bounty equipment, a desperate escape that only fueled their darker impulses. The Tahitian women, who had already endured unimaginable hardships, found themselves in an even more precarious position. With fewer men to protect them and no semblance of justice, they became vulnerable targets. Exploitation, abuse, and forced servitude became their daily reality. The mutineers, particularly Quintal and McCoy, became notorious for their cruelty and debauchery. Their lives became a cycle of drunken revelry, domestic violence, and arbitrary rule. Homes were not safe havens, but zones of fear where the women and their children lived under constant threat. McCoy, driven mad by rum, eventually threw himself off a cliff. Quintal, a man of relentless violence, threatened to kill everyone on the island if he didn't get his way, holding the community hostage with his increasingly erratic and murderous demands. This was Pitcairn's darkest hour. The population, once numbering 27, had dwindled to a handful of traumatized women, terrified children, and 2 remaining mutineers, Edward Young and John Adams, who were themselves teetering on the brink of moral collapse. The island, once a symbol of escape and hope, had become a living hell, a place where human dignity was stripped away, and the very concept of community had withered, bringing the entire experiment to the very precipice of total, irreversible collapse. While the mutineers descended into a maelstrom of violence and despair, the true unsung heroes of Pitcairn were the Tahitian women. Their story, often relegated to the footnotes of history, is one of extraordinary resilience and survival against unimaginable odds. They were not merely passive victims. They were the bedrock of the community, enduring profound hardship, loss, and constant exploitation. Yet their strength was paramount for Pitcairn's very existence. They had witnessed their male kin murdered, their partners taken, their children born into a world of chaos. They suffered abuse, lived in constant fear, and bore the brunt of the mutineers' drunken rages. Yet, through it all, they continued to care for their children, maintain the gardens, harvest food, and keep the spark of humanity alive. It was their knowledge of island life, their traditional skills in foraging, weaving, and cultivation that prevented outright starvation. Without their tireless labor and their innate connection to the land, the entire settlement would have undoubtedly perished. More than just physical survival, the women also provided a crucial moral anchor. They held onto their Tahitian traditions, their songs, their stories, nurturing a cultural heritage that would blend with the remnants of European influence to form a new, unique Pitcairn identity. It was their influence, their subtle yet persistent pleas for peace, and their maternal instinct to protect their children that eventually began to chip away at the mutineers' depravity. They mourned their dead, comforted their living, and in quiet acts of defiance and solidarity, planted the seeds for a better future. Their steadfast spirit, their refusal to completely succumb to the brutality around them, eventually helped to usher in a transformative change on the island. They were the silent witnesses, the enduring mothers, the keepers of hope in a world consumed by darkness, demonstrating the profound strength of the human spirit in the face of absolute adversity. From the ashes of Pitcairn's violent beginning, an unlikely figure emerged as the reluctant architect of its redemption, John Adams. Of the 27 souls who first landed on the island, and the 9 mutineers, Adams was destined to be the last man standing, the sole survivor of the initial generation of mutineers. His early life on Pitcairn had been far from exemplary. He had participated in the mutiny, taken part in the drunken revelry and the exploitation of the women, and witnessed, and perhaps even contributed to, the bloodshed that nearly annihilated the community. He was a rough, uneducated sailor, a product of the harsh British naval system and the lawless chaos of Pitcairn. But as the years of anarchy ground on, as William McCoy plunged to his death and Matthew Quintal descended into murderous madness, Adams found himself increasingly isolated, confronting the stark reality of their collective ruin. When Quintal, in a fit of drunken rage, threatened to murder the remaining women and children, it was Adams, along with Edward Young, who made the agonizing decision to end the reign of terror. They subdued and killed Quintal, an act of desperate self-preservation that also marked a turning point. With Quintal gone and Young succumbing to asthma shortly thereafter, John Adams was left as the sole adult male mutineer amongst a growing population of Tahitian women and their mixed-race children. He stood at a crossroads, continued down the path of depravity, or forge a new way forward. The weight of responsibility, the cries of the fatherless children, and the silent suffering of the women began to penetrate his hardened exterior. This rough sailor, once adrift in moral ambiguity, started to transform. He became the reluctant patriarch, bearing the impossible burden of creating a future for a community born of sin and sorrow, guiding them towards a horizon of peace that, until then, had seemed impossibly distant. His survival was not just a twist of fate. It was the improbable foundation upon which Pitcairn's unique democracy would eventually be built. The transformation of John Adams from a mutineer to a patriarch was not merely a reaction to circumstance. It was profoundly spiritual, sparked by a serendipitous discovery that would forever alter the course of Pitcairn's history. Buried amongst the salvaged remnants of the HMS Bounty, tucked away from the chaos and forgotten during the years of despair, Adams stumbled upon a most extraordinary treasure, the ship's Bible and a common prayer book. These were not just books. They were the last surviving vestiges of a moral and spiritual framework, a powerful symbol of the world they had abandoned. In the solitude of his newfound responsibility, with Edward Young gone and no other mutineer left to influence him, Adams began to read. He read to himself, and then, hesitantly at first, to the women and children who gathered around him. The words of Scripture, of forgiveness, redemption, and a higher law, resonated deeply within his weary soul. After years of lawlessness and brutality, the profound moral clarity of the Bible offered a path out of the darkness, a glimmer of hope for atonement. It sparked in him a religious awakening, a desperate yearning to seek redemption for his own past transgressions and to build a truly moral society for the children growing up on Pitcairn. This simple act of reading became the cornerstone of a new social order. Adams, guided by the Scripture, began to teach the children to read and write using the very books that had led him to salvation. He established daily prayers, Sabbath observance, and a code of conduct based on Christian principles. No longer would the island be governed by brute force or drunken whim. The power of the Word, discovered amidst the wreckage of their past, became the blueprint for Pitcairn's future. It was the genesis of their unique, enduring democracy, a society founded not on the dictates of a king or the whims of mutineers, but on the profound moral authority of a single, salvaged Bible, laying the groundwork for a peace that would last for generations. From the ashes of violence and despair, a quiet revolution began on Pitcairn. With the last of the original mutineers gone, only John Adams remained, burdened by the ghosts of the past and the responsibility for a new generation. It was a crucible moment, one where Adams, deeply changed by his introspection and the discovery of the Bounty's salvaged Bible, embraced an extraordinary new role. No longer a renegade sailor, he became the island's sole patriarch, spiritual guide, and most importantly, its teacher. His classroom was the very fabric of the island itself, the shade of a breadfruit tree, the open expanse of the clifftop, the simple dwellings of the community. Using the precious, water-damaged Bible as his primary text, Adams began to instill not just literacy, but a profound sense of Christian morality and order. He taught the children to read by tracing the parables, to write by copying verses, and to understand right from wrong through the Ten Commandments. The harsh, untamed impulses that had led to the mutiny and the subsequent bloodshed were systematically replaced with lessons of forgiveness, communal responsibility, and the sanctity of life. Imagine the hushed reverence as Adams, his weathered face illuminated by the tropical sun, read aloud, his voice resonating with newfound purpose. For these children, born into isolation, the Bible became their window to the world, and Adams their conduit to a moral framework that transcended their remote existence. This wasn't merely rote learning. It was a societal transformation. Adams established a routine of daily prayers, Sabbath observance, and a strict moral code that dictated everything from personal conduct to communal disputes. He mediated disagreements, offered counsel, and guided the nascent community with a blend of paternal authority and newfound humility. This profound commitment to education and moral renewal laid the indispensable groundwork for Pitcairn's future. It was the quiet, determined act of a single man, turning the tide of chaos, steering a shipwrecked population towards a destiny far grander than mere survival. It was, in essence, the very genesis of Pitcairn's unique societal character, a deliberate forging of virtue in isolation, preparing them for an unforeseen encounter with the world. Under John Adams's unwavering guidance, the nascent community of Pitcairn Island began to formalize its own distinct system of governance. It was a remarkable feat, born not from established political theory or European parliamentary tradition, but from necessity, shared experience, and the unique circumstances of their isolated existence. What emerged was a fascinating blend of patriarchal leadership, deep-seated communal decision-making, and an ingrained sense of shared responsibility, the foundational elements of an unexpected early democracy. Adams, as the last surviving mutineer and the patriarch of the blended families, held a profound moral authority. His word carried immense weight, not through force, but through respect earned by his transformation and his devotion to the community's welfare. Yet, this was no absolute monarchy. Crucially, major decisions impacting the island's future, from the distribution of land and resources to the resolution of interpersonal disputes, were debated and decided communally. Imagine the islanders, a tight-knit family of mixed heritage, gathering, perhaps on a flat stone clearing or inside a large dwelling, their voices contributing to the common good. Adams would present an issue, but then listen, guide, and ultimately facilitate a consensus that everyone could live with. This system fostered an extraordinary degree of accountability and participation. Every adult, man and woman, had a say in the communal discussions there. Voices valued as essential to the collective survival and prosperity. Shared responsibility was not merely an ideal. It was the daily reality of Pitcairn life. Tasks such as farming, fishing, house building, and even the rudimentary maintenance of paths and shared spaces were undertaken collectively. There was no concept of private property in the European sense. Resources were managed for the benefit of all. This egalitarian ethos, born from their shared struggle and reinforced by Adams's teachings, prevented the accumulation of power or wealth in the hands of a few. It was a practical, living democracy, forged in the crucible of isolation, ensuring that every member felt a vital stake in the island's present and its unfolding future. This was the Pitcairn Way, an enduring legacy of cooperative self-governance that defied all expectations. For nearly 2 decades, Pitcairn Island remained a secret, a forgotten speck of land in the vast Pacific, guarding the astonishing tale of the Bounty mutineers and their unlikely transformation. The world believed the mutineers had vanished without a trace, swallowed by the ocean or lost to the perils of the uncharted seas. But fate, in its unpredictable way, was about to pull back the veil on this remarkable hidden civilization. The year was 1808. On a routine sealing voyage, the American ship Topaz, under the command of Captain Mayhew Folger, was navigating the remote southeastern Pacific. It was a world still largely unmapped, filled with both peril and the promise of rich bounty. As the Topaz approached the coordinates where Pitcairn was theoretically located, an island whose existence was only vaguely acknowledged on outdated charts, Captain Folger spotted a telltale sign of land, a plume of smoke rising into the clear blue sky. Curiosity piqued, he steered his vessel closer. What happened next was an encounter that would ripple through history. As the Topaz neared the shore, a small, skillfully crafted canoe, paddled by 3 young men, approached the American vessel. Imagine the astonishment of Captain Folger and his crew when these men, with their sun-kissed skin and Polynesian features, hailed them in perfect English. They introduced themselves as Friday October Christian, son of Fletcher Christian, Edward Young, and George Young. The sheer improbability of it must have been staggering. Here, thousands of miles from any known European settlement, was a thriving, English-speaking community led by the son of the very mutineer the British Admiralty had hunted for years. The young men invited Folger ashore, where he met the venerated John Adams, now a man of peace, surrounded by a thriving community of 34 souls, the descendants of the mutineers and their Tahitian companions. Folger was astounded by the piety, industry, and orderly conduct of the islanders. He quickly grasped the magnitude of his discovery. He had not just found an island, but a living testament to human resilience, redemption, and the extraordinary power of self-governance in the most unexpected of places. The Topaz returned to port, carrying the incredible news, shattered 2 decades of silence, and brought the astonishing saga of Pitcairn and its unique democratic experiment to the astonished gaze of the outside world. News of Pitcairn's rediscovery spread like wildfire, particularly within the British Admiralty. The initial reaction was one of profound shock, quickly followed by the imperative of duty. The last surviving mutineer of the HMS Bounty, John Adams, was finally accounted for. According to naval law, he was a fugitive subject to arrest and trial for mutiny, a crime punishable by death. In 1814, another British naval vessel, the HMS Britain, under Captain Sir Thomas Staines, visited Pitcairn, specifically tasked with verifying the topaz's account and apprehending Adams. But what Captain Staines found on Pitcairn profoundly challenged the very foundations of British justice. Instead of a renegade stronghold, he encountered a peaceful, pious, and self-sufficient community living under a strict moral code, entirely free of crime. He met John Adams, not as a hardened criminal, but as a revered patriarch, a living testament to redemption, surrounded by a devout population who revered him as their spiritual and temporal leader. The children, Staines observed, were well-educated, well-mannered, and spoke impeccable English, a stark contrast to the lawless image of mutineers. The dissonance was undeniable. How could a man who committed such a heinous crime have fostered such an exemplary society? Captain Staines, deeply moved by what he witnessed, faced an unprecedented moral dilemma. To arrest Adams would be to shatter this fragile, flourishing society, plunging it back into uncertainty and potentially destroying its unique social fabric. Recognizing the extraordinary transformation and the utter impracticality of prosecuting a man who had effectively created a functional, moral society from nothing, Staines made a momentous decision. He chose not to arrest John Adams. This informal pardon, later tacitly endorsed by the British government, was more than an act of clemency. It was an extraordinary acknowledgment of Pitcairn's unique status. It signaled a profound shift, allowing the island to continue its remarkable path of self-governance, unburdened by external interference. This decision, born of pragmatic compassion and respect for Pitcairn's demonstrated virtue, solidified the island's unique democratic journey. It was a formal, albeit understated, sanctioning of their autonomy, setting Pitcairn on a course as a sovereign, self-ruling community, thousands of miles from the nearest colonial power, an enduring anomaly in an age of empire. 2 centuries after its rediscovery, Pitcairn Island continues its improbable journey as the world's smallest democracy. But its future, like its past, is defined by dramatic challenges and an enduring, almost defiant spirit. Today, Pitcairn's population hovers around a mere 50 permanent residents, a stark testament to the relentless isolation and the lure of the modern world. This dwindling demographic is perhaps its greatest threat, as the fight to maintain a viable community becomes a daily struggle against demographic decline. Efforts to preserve Pitcairn's unique heritage and attract new residents are constant. The island government, a remarkably functional democratic entity for its size, actively seeks immigrants, offering land and a unique way of life to those willing to embrace its remoteness. Yet the practicalities are immense. Limited economic opportunities beyond tourism and philately, irregular shipping schedules, and the sheer cost of travel and importing goods. The closest hospital is over 300 miles away, accessible only by a long, arduous sea journey. Despite these hurdles, the spirit of communal cooperation and self-reliance, forged by John Adams, persists. Modern technology, ironically, is both a lifeline and a potential threat. Satellite internet connects Pitcairn to the global village, allowing islanders to communicate with family abroad, manage nascent businesses, and even engage in online education. Yet, it also exposes them to a world that can make their simple, communal life seem stark in comparison, accelerating the brain drain of younger generations seeking more opportunities. The islanders cling fiercely to their unique Pitcairn language, an English-Tahitian Creole, and their distinct cultural practices, including their famed wood carvings and honey production. Pitcairn's continued existence is a delicate balance. It stands as a living museum, a testament to human adaptability, but also a poignant symbol of the struggles faced by micronations in a globalized world. Its enduring status as the smallest democracy on Earth is a source of immense pride, but also a constant reminder of its fragility. The community battles against the odds, driven by a deep-seated desire to honor its extraordinary origins and secure a future for a way of life found nowhere else on the planet. Pitcairn Island. More than just a remote dot on a map. It is an enduring human experiment, a testament to the extraordinary capacity for adaptability, redemption, and the unexpected ways democracy can flourish. From the ashes of mutiny and murder, a society was forged, not through conquest or grand design, but through sheer necessity, moral transformation, and collective will. It stands as a profound historical and social anomaly, a living microcosm of humanity's deepest struggles and greatest triumphs. Its legacy is multi-layered. Firstly, it embodies the ultimate tale of redemption. John Adams, a man branded a traitor and a mutineer, transcended his past to become the benevolent architect of a moral, self-governing society. His journey, reflected in the very DNA of Pitcairn, proves that even the most desperate circumstances can be a crucible for profound personal and communal change. It reminds us that humanity, given the right impetus and leadership, can always choose a path of peace and cooperation over conflict. Secondly, Pitcairn is a powerful demonstration of the inherent human drive towards self-governance. Without external models or imposed structures, this isolated community intuitively developed a form of direct democracy, where every voice mattered and collective welfare was paramount. This organic evolution of democratic principles, born from a desire for stability and fairness, speaks volumes about our innate need for order, justice, and shared responsibility, even in the absence of traditional institutions. Finally, Pitcairn's story is one of enduring resilience. Against the crushing odds of isolation, environmental challenges, and demographic decline, the islanders persist, fiercely guarding their unique identity and heritage. Their struggle today is a universal one. How to maintain cultural distinctiveness in an ever-globalizing world, how to nurture community in an age of individualism, and how to define national identity on the smallest possible scale. The story of Pitcairn Island is a beacon, reminding us that the human spirit, when tested to its limits, can not only survive but thrive, creating societies that challenge our understanding of what is possible. It is a chronicle whispered by the winds of the Pacific, a powerful narrative of transformation, hope, and the extraordinary dawn of an uncharted democracy. From the desperate act of mutiny aboard the HMS Bounty to the solitary, volcanic shores of Pitcairn, we have witnessed an extraordinary journey of human resilience. A society born from rebellion, marked by early chaos and bloodshed, Pitcairn Island stands as a powerful testament to humanity's capacity for profound transformation. Here, far from the established norms of empire, a shared moral vision, fostered by figures like John Adams, cultivated order from anarchy, building a community founded on justice, equality, and self-governance. The Pitcairn experiment reminds us that democracy is not merely an abstract concept or a grand national institution, but a living, breathing covenant forged by shared understanding and mutual respect, even among the most unlikely of architects. Against staggering odds, isolation, limited resources, and the weight of their own dark past, the islanders carved out an enduring way of life, demonstrating that societal rebirth is possible, even in the shadow of grave transgressions. Pitcairn is more than a historical footnote. It is a profound human story, a microcosm of how societies can be forged, sustained, and evolve. It compels us to reflect on the inherent human drive for order, community, and the surprising ways ordinary people, when confronted with absolute necessity, can create extraordinary systems of governance. The uncharted democracy of Pitcairn Island endures, a powerful, living echo of courage, adaptation, and the enduring quest for a self-determined future.